Good evening and welcome to News Review. The Chief Minister this week told the Fourth Committee at the United Nations in New York that Gibraltar has achieved a full measure of self-government short of independence under the 2006 Constitution. Fabian Picardo put it to the committee that if it agrees that this is the case, it should delist Gibraltar. If it does not, it is its role to pinpoint the deficiencies in our constitution so the shortcomings can be addressed with the UK. The Chief Minister was addressing the UN 50 years after Sir Joshua Hassan and Peter Isola did so for the first time. The chairman of the Self-Determination for Gibraltar group, Dennis Matthews, also addressed the committee. 6 students from Gibraltar were present for the first time.
The meeting began with the Spanish representative reiterating Spain's support for the principle of self-determination, but saying it's not applicable to Gibraltar. And decolonization, he said, had to be on a case-by-case basis. In Gibraltar's case, he added, it was a principle of territorial integrity that was relevant, with the UK occupying the isthmus and the waters illegally. The Spanish representative again put on record his government's opposition to a return to the tripartite forum. He said Gibraltar had had a disproportionate role and had used the forum for its own political advancement. Gibraltar's voice, he said, had to be heard, but only via the UK as the administering power. On the current tensions, he said these dated back to March last year, when the present administration abandoned the fishing agreement. A solution, he concluded, could only be found in a return to bilateral negotiations. The Chief Minister's address followed. He dismissed the notion that decolonization could not apply where there's a sovereignty claim. He said it was nonsense to suggest different principles can apply simply because a neighbouring state stakes a claim on the territory. And he asked the committee to guard against Spain and Argentina's efforts to try to create such a doctrine. He then highlighted the bullying Gibraltar has been subjected to by Spain, the propaganda campaign to demonize Gibraltarians, and the negative effects this is having.
Economic sanctions, physical restrictions at our frontier, police and military invasions of our territorial sea, shots fired at innocent Gibraltarians, arson and damage against the property of Gibraltarians in Spain, in Europe, in the 21st century, and by a candidate to membership of the Security Council.
And in contrast, the Chief Minister spoke of the jobs Gibraltar provided for cross-frontier workers and how both Gibraltar and the UK remained committed to the tripartite forum for dialogue, even though Spain had turned her back on it. He updated the committee on the possibility of ad hoc talks and said there would never be a return to bilateralism. Fabian Picardo told the Fourth Committee that Gibraltar had achieved one potential modality of a status granting us a full measure of self-government short of independence. The ball was then squarely placed in the committee's court.
I submit it is now the duty of the C24 and of this committee to revert to us and advise whether you consider that a full measure of self-government short of independence has been achieved. If it has, then we should be delisted as having fulfilled the fourth option for decolonization available to the peoples of non-self-governing territories as provided for in General Assembly Resolution 2625, Roman 25 of the 24th of October 1970. If our Constitution does not, in your view or the view of the C24, grant us a full measure of self-government short of independence, then we ask you to tell us where you consider that the deficiencies lie in our Constitution so that we can engage with the United Kingdom to address any such shortcomings. What makes no sense, Mr. Chairman, is a continued deafening silence by the C24 and a continued reference to a consensus decision between the United Kingdom and Spain, which does nothing to advance our progress towards decolonization.
The Self-Determination for Gibraltar group address reinforced the government's speech with its similarities, with the group's chairman also asking for advice on Gibraltar's decolonization based on the Gibraltarians' right to self-determination. Dennis Matthews also told the committee that Spain's malicious campaign against Gibraltar, aided and abetted by its state-controlled media, was whipping up nationalistic fervour and hatred in a manner reminiscent of the Franco era. He said, an objective analysis of the present Spanish government's actions against Gibraltar would convince anyone that they fall squarely within the definitions of terrorism as set out by the European Union.
It wasn't something that I said lightly. It was based on the fact that there is in the European Union a framework decision that was taken in 2002 and ratified in 2008, which says that if a country is trying to damage the economy of another country or trying to scare people and intimidate them, those are acts of terrorism.
The Chief Minister said he'd spoken as his generation's representative and, referring to the students who were accompanying him, said they represented future generations. This story, he added, will not end until we succeed. So 50 years on, Gibraltar returns to plead its case. And with time, the case appears to be getting stronger. Arguments of territorial integrity perhaps less relevant, and the rights of people more significant. Perhaps one day the UN will run out of excuses as to why it refuses to keep up with the times. Christine Vasquez, GBC News, New York.
For its part, the UK has strenuously denied that the isthmus and the waters around Gibraltar were illegally occupied. It stood by the Gibraltar government's decision to create an artificial reef and restated its commitment never to enter into a process of sovereignty negotiations with which Gibraltar is not content.
Exercising his right of reply, the UK's UN representative said that under international law, territorial waters flow from sovereignty over the land. He pointed out that this position is established by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Therefore, he added, when land is ceded, as under the Treaty of Utrecht, sovereignty over the corresponding waters normally follows. Thus, the UK is assured of its sovereignty over British Gibraltar territorial waters. The UK representative also refuted Spain's allegation that Gibraltar unilaterally dropped concrete blocks in the bay. He said the creation of the reef was legal and is part of the Gibraltar government's long-term marine environment plan. He noted that the use of inert concrete blocks to create artificial reefs is consistent with international best practice and with Spain's own approach to artificial reefs. As regards Gibraltar's status, he reaffirmed that as a separate territory recognized by the United Nations and included in its list of non-self-governing territories since 1946, Gibraltar enjoys the individual and collective rights accorded by the UN Charter. He regretted Spain's withdrawal from the Trilateral Forum for Dialogue, but noted the constructive move to ad hoc talks, which, he said, would be on the basis of reflecting the interests, rights and responsibilities of the people of Gibraltar.
Meanwhile, there were reactions from the ambassador who replied to the Chief Minister's speech in the Spanish media. Mr. Arias told the news agency EFE his government never lies, bullies nor fires bullets. This follows the accusations of a hate campaign and the SDGG's description of Spain's actions as acts of terrorism. And the Spanish Minister for Defense, Pedro Morenes, also responded to Mr. Picardo's address, arguing that Spain will never allow herself to be complicit in any unlawful Gibraltar activity. Meanwhile, Number 6 says all the statements made by the Spanish politicians suggest that the references by the Chief Minister of a campaign of lies and disinformation, shots being fired on innocent Gibraltarians within British Gibraltar territorial waters, and damage to property of Gibraltarians are untrue. The government has circulated to the local and Spanish media photos and evidence of the damage done to some Gibraltarian vehicles in La Linea. They've also shared video evidence of shots being fired by Guardia Civil officers at a Gibraltarian jet skier who was within British Gibraltar territorial waters, and the now infamous Spanish play by teenagers. A jury to hear the trial of the Marache brothers was impaneled this week. Benjamin, Solomon and Isaac Marache, together with Leanne Turnbull, faced 2 charges of conspiracy to defraud. The charges date back to 2004.
It's taken 3 years to get to this stage, and it'll take a few more months to get a jury verdict. Jury trials usually involve 9 jurors, but given the complexity and length of this case, the number has been increased to 12. A special system for selecting the jury has also been devised. Every day, around 100 people on the jury list will be asked to come in and fill in a questionnaire which has been devised by the bench in consultation with the counsel involved in the case. Sir Geoffrey Grigson, a UK judge who's been brought in specifically to hear this case, will then consider the eligibility of the potential jurors to hear the case, again in consultation with the lawyers. A jury is expected to be sworn in by Friday, and the trial should begin in earnest next week. Benjamin Solomon and Isaac Marache, together with Leanne Turnbull, face charges of conspiring to defraud clients of Marache & Co. and/or trusts connected to those clients in 2004. They're also charged with conspiring to defraud Gibraltar in 2009. The defendants were arrested in 2010.
The Foreign Office will be making another formal diplomatic protest after the Guardia Civil exercised jurisdiction and took executive action in British Gibraltar territorial waters off the east side last Monday evening. The Royal Navy read warnings to Rio Sedena after a Guardia Civil officer boarded a Spanish fishing boat in British Gibraltar territorial waters. The Guardia Civil was searching the boat and had asked to see the fisherman's papers. The Navy's Gibraltar Squadron and the RGP attended, informing the Guardia Civil officers they were in British Gibraltar territorial waters and therefore breaking the law with their actions. The fishing boat motored off into the Spanish waters, shadowed by the Guardia Civil. A spokesperson for the convent said that London and Madrid were informed immediately. And we'll be back with more of this week's news after the break.